Today at the National Press Club, the Foreign Affairs debate. The Foreign Minister Marise Payne and the Shadow Foreign Minister Wong square off over which party is best placed to tackle the growing list of strategic challenges which are facing Australia.
Good afternoon and welcome to the National Press Club in Canberra for today's Westpac Address. I'm Laura Tingle, the club's president. Today we're hosting the two women who hope to guide Australia's foreign policy after the election on May 21, Senator Marise Payne and Senator Wong. And we give them a platform to debate their respective policy positions. The guidelines of the debate have been agreed and are fully set out on the club's website, but here are the main points. Each speaker is allocated 5 minutes for opening remarks. There'll then be questions from the media. The questions should be posed as one question for both speakers or one question to one of the speakers. Separate questions to the two speakers will be disallowed and only the first question will be dealt with. This will be firmly enforced. There will be a maximum of 2 minutes to reply to questions, and if the question has only been put to one speaker, the other speaker would have the option to respond to the answer given for a maximum of 1 minute. I'll endeavour, however, to ensure there is a free-flowing discussion and grant extensions to time if this assists that discussion. As moderator, I may ask my own questions, ask for clarification, or seek more information from one or both participants in response to their answers. At the direction of the moderator, that's me, our speakers will be permitted to ask one question of each other during the debate. Each speaker in the reverse order of operating statements will be given 2 minutes for closing remarks. And there's been a coin toss. There's been a coin toss to determine the order of speakers in the opening addresses, and that's gone to Senator Wong. And I'd like to invite you to join me in thanking her to the. Sorry, it's been a long week.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm very pleased to be here. So can I thank the National Press Club for hosting us? Can I thank Maurice for agreeing to the debate? And thanks to all of you, including the members of the Diplomatic Corps who are here and those watching. I first acknowledge the traditional owners of this land on which we meet, the Ngunnawal people, and pay my respects to elders past and present. One of the many reasons, and there are a few, that I hope Australians will elect an Albanese Labor government is to fulfil the promise of the Uluru Statement from the heart. You see, foreign policy starts with who we are. We tell a more powerful and more persuasive story of Australia when we tell our full story, our modern diversity and the rich heritage of our First Nations peoples. It is a story the world is ready to hear. It counters narratives from countries that seek advantage over us. So I am pleased to announce today that if elected, Labor will deliver a First Nations foreign policy that weaves the voices and practices of the world's oldest continuing culture into the way we talk to the world and in the work of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. We will appoint an ambassador for First Nations peoples, and we will ensure First Nations peoples have a stronger voice in our engagement with the world, deepening their long-held ties across countries of the Indo-Pacific. The Uluru Statement gives us the chance to be a more unified nation, stronger and more resilient at home and in the world. And Australians understand why that matters. Our nation has not known such a vexing convergence of circumstances since the end of World War II. From Mr. Putin's illegal and immoral war against the people of Ukraine to a more expansionist and aggressive China in our region, the world has changed. Our region is being reshaped. This generation of political leaders has a responsibility in this reshaping to secure Australia's interests today and in the future. It is our job. We don't have time for more of the same. And more of Mr. Morrison means more of the same defence capability failures. More of the same, it's not my job to pick up the phone to the region. More of the same chest beating while letting Australia get beaten to the punch. And we are seeing the consequences of those failures. Just as we saw with the bushfires, with the floods, with vaccines, with rapid antigen tests. Now we see in Solomon Islands that Mr Morrison's inaction has made things worse. The fact is, the risks Australians face will be compounded by 3 more years of Scott Morrison. More of the same excuses, the same political buck passing, the same political games ahead of the national interest, whilst our problems just get bigger. And the rest of the world trusts Mr Morrison as little as Australians do. Australians know their Prime Minister's standing in the world is defined by his leaking of private text messages against a close partner. Australians know they're stumping up $5.5 billion for submarines that don't exist. Australians know that veterans issued warning after warning about the need to get people out of Afghanistan well before Kabul fell. And Australians know the world has changed and that China has changed. Australians want a plan to shape a better future for ourselves in the world, and Labor has that plan. We understand that security in the world means we must use all elements of Australian power, strategic, economic, social and diplomatic, to maximise our influence and deliver for our interests. We understand that security in the world means we have to secure our region, playing to our strengths with our Pacific family to address our shared challenges, including climate change, strengthening our relationships in Southeast Asia to uphold the rules of the road, shaping the world for the better, and working with our friends and partners to preserve public goods, give form to our values and solve global problems, making a difference on climate at home and in the world. And I will say this, as someone who has fought for over a decade against people like Barnaby Joyce and Tony Abbott, it is only a federal Labor government that will deliver real action on climate change. We need to bring together all elements of our national power to maximise Australian influence and to deliver for our security and prosperity. As our Chief of Defence has said during this campaign, there is a need for greater integration of power. That is what an Albanese Labor government will deliver. Stronger in the world and more unified at home.
Ladies and gentlemen, could you please welcome Senator Marise Payne to the podium now, please.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much to the National Press Club, to Senator Wong, to Laura, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, the Ngunnawal people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I start today by acknowledging the shock death on Wednesday of the Honourable Sam Basil, Deputy Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea, a friend I had known since 2008 and worked with even more in recent years. His death is a great loss to Papua New Guinea, and I send my sympathies to his family, the government and the people of PNG. These are important discussions here at the National Press Club. We are in the most challenging global period in many decades. COVID-19's economic and health impacts continue. Authoritarian powers are asserting themselves, seen in Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, a violation of international law that must not be repeated, including in our region. Strategic competition is intensifying and requires careful attention to ensure it does not escalate into confrontation. For the foreseeable future, our region and our globe will be characterised by change and disruption. And this will be the case, whoever leads Australia after May 21. This government has, for years, recognised and responded to these trends, which has meant making both significant and at times difficult decisions for our nation. We joined the AUKUS partnership with the United Kingdom and United States. We have revived and significantly advanced the Quad with India, Japan and the US, which was abandoned by the Rudd government in 2008. We introduced the Pacific Step Up and provided important pandemic support in partnership with our Pacific neighbours. We have significantly deepened cooperation with our key partner, India, through both a comprehensive strategic partnership and our economic cooperation and trade agreement. We've also struck free trade agreements with the UK, with Indonesia, and joined the CPTPP and the RCEP. We have deepened our partnerships with others in the Indo-Pacific, including through our ASEAN-Australia Comprehensive Strategic Partnership, the first country to have a CSP with ASEAN. We've supported the Pacific in climate resilience and adaptation and in their presence and engagement at multiple international climate discussions. We've legislated to ensure state and territory consistency on foreign policy and for Magnitsky sanction reforms. And we've prioritised health, security and equality for women and girls in our region. Our approach, which we will maintain and grow if we are re-elected, is built on resilience, on relationships and on rules. We are increasing our national resilience by strengthening our economy and investing in our defence, security and diplomatic capabilities, while also supporting the resilience of our partners in the region. We know that strong, sovereign states are vital to the security and prosperity of all. We have expanded and deepened our relationships because a strong network of partners and allies increases our capacity to exercise positive influence. The sovereignty of our partners is paramount. We don't lecture them. We cooperate closely while respecting their sovereign decisions. We've advocated strongly for the rules-based global order because a level playing field is good for both our national security and our economy. Consistency has been vital. Under the Morrison government, Australia has not blinked. We have shown we will not bend to coercion. We have shown our friends and allies that we can be relied on to act in accordance with our clear values. And a re-elected Morrison government will continue to build our strength at home, including our economy, our security, our human and social fabric, and work ever more closely globally with others, particularly like-minded democracies. This is the best way to preserve our ability as a nation to make our own choices and the best way to protect our freedoms as Australians.
Thank you, Senator Payne. If I could open up, you've both obviously addressed a more aggressive China in your opening statements. We know what Australia has been doing until now about China, and we know what China's been doing. And you've just said, Senator Payne, that we've shown we won't blink. Well, what are we going to do in the next 3 years about China? We've got a complex relationship with them. It's not just a strategic one, it's also a trade relationship. What are we going to do about the relationship? And it's emerged in the last couple of days, for example, that neither leader has met the new Chinese ambassador. What do we do to try to improve and de-escalate the bad blood in the relationship? And maybe Senator Payne could go first.
I think the premise of your question, Laura, which includes the phrase de-escalate the bad blood, implies, in a way that I don't necessarily accept, that Australia has not done the right thing in terms of protecting our national interests and our national security, which is what we will always put forward first and foremost for our nation and our people. We will work closely with our partners, as we have, to secure and pursue the security, the prosperity, the stability of the Indo-Pacific region. But overall, we will continue to seek a constructive relationship with China. But it has to be a relationship in which our sovereignty and our interests are respected, and in which no party is coerced or subjected to pressures that breach international rules. So is the de-escalation that you talk about accepting a 200% tariff on Australian wine? Or is it accepting the coercive impositions on Australian barley? Or is it accepting one of the 14 points in the document that was handed to your media colleague Jonathan Kersley by the Chinese embassy? I've had a very constructive initial meeting with the new Chinese ambassador in Canberra, and I'm very pleased to continue and to grow that relationship. I have said at every opportunity that Australian ministers, foreign ministers, Prime Ministers, Trade Ministers, Finance Ministers, Treasurers are open and available to engage with our colleagues in Beijing. And of course we are. But that opportunity has not been availed by the government in Beijing. And ultimately Australia continues to indicate that we are open to that constructive engagement, and I look forward to it being taken up.
Senator Wong.
Well, our relationship with China has changed because China has changed. And we should start from that premise. And to be very clear, an Albanese Labor government would not take a backward step when it comes to standing up for Australia's interests in this relationship or in any other relationship. And Maurice is right to point to the coercive economic measures. We put our view very clearly on that publicly, gave bipartisan support to the government on that, and it was a view I put, as Maurice did, when we both separately met the Chinese ambassador. What I would say is this, though. In many ways, focusing only on that relationship perhaps misses the central point, which is the reshaping of the region in which we live. And so whilst we might not be able to change China and how it chooses to engage with us, what we can do is focus on building the sort of region we want. And we want a region which is peaceful, prosperous, stable, and in which sovereignty is respected. And that is why our position on the South China Sea, for example, matters. It is a bipartisan position of both parties of government, and so should it be. So my view about it is we should be very clear about what our interests are. The reality is, whoever wins government, and Mr Albanese has said this, there will be differences between Australia and China that have to be managed, regardless of which of us is the foreign minister after the election. And those interests have to be managed with very clear view to what Australia's interests are.
Well, if I could just have a follow-up on that, with just a 1-minute response from both of you. You're both basically saying Australia will not back down. Is there a marker that the Chinese can give to show their good faith in trying to improve the relationship?
Well, they could desist from the coercive economic positions that they put in place in relation to Australia. I think that's a position both parties have. They could comply with the decision of the arbitral tribunal in relation to the South China Sea. I mean, these are matters which go to the rule of law, the rules of the road for the region, which are not only Australia's interests, they are, but they're Indonesia's and the Philippines. These are positions which matter to the region.
And we've consistently raised the points that I commented on in my answer to your first question in relation to economic coercion, but also in relation to Australia's freedoms to protect our national interests. And they are, in our view, fundamentals. But in addition, we have been clear about our concerns in relation to human rights, particularly with regard to Xinjiang. We see further arrests this week, including of Emeritus Cardinal in Hong Kong and other freedom, democracy, I should say, advocates. These continue to be of concern. With great strength and with the rise of China, welcome by the world, comes also responsibility. Responsibility that other great powers consistently exercise in relation to the rules-based global order that has stood us in such good stead over many decades.
Ben Packham.
Thank you both. Ben Packham from The Australian. Senator Wong, you've been Shadow Foreign Minister since July 2016. How many times have you met with senior Chinese officials during your time in that role, and is there any problem with that sort of thing? And to Minister Payne, Scott Morrison today said Richard Marles' meetings with the Chinese ambassador were a bit strange. But was your office informed about each of those meetings, and did your office clear them?
Me first. I certainly went to China for a visit. I'd have to look at what occurred between 2016 and 2019. I think this term I certainly met with the outgoing Chinese ambassador and, as I said, met with the new Chinese ambassador, and we ensured we had a discussion with Maurice's office, because I think it is very important on the issues that we've averted to, whether it's the economic coercion or human rights issues, that there is a very clear bipartisan position put to the Chinese, and we've done that. I certainly in the last term met with the then Chinese ambassador to inform him that Labor would not be supporting the China extradition treaty despite being asked by the Turnbull government to do so. So I have met with the Chinese. I mean, look, we all understand why Mr Morrison is saying what he's saying. We all understand that, you know, in the lead up to an election, things will get increasingly desperate and accusations would be made. But I just want to make this point, because there's been too much of this in this campaign. You know, we are all patriots. We are all patriots. Mr Morrison and the Liberal Party do not have a monopoly on patriotism.
In relation to specific approaches from Mr Miles, my understanding is a small number of those meetings were advised to my office. It's not my role to clear them or otherwise. I would describe them as being noted, but a small number, certainly not the number reported today. But I would say that it is important to be consistent. And that is certainly the approach that this government has taken in all of our engagement across the government. We know from reporting that Mr Miles has, for example, confirmed that he's provided a speech in advance to the Chinese embassy. I would not do that myself. In fact, I wouldn't provide a speech in advance to any other embassy for any reason. He has spoken favourably in relation to Chinese engagement in the region. He's spoken favourably in the tides that bind. I'm sure you've read every word, Ben, of the Chinese relationship more broadly in the Pacific, and Australia's engagement as well. They are statements of the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, the person who would be the Deputy Prime Minister, on the record. They're not entirely consistent with the policies presented now by the Opposition, and I think it is appropriate to note that and to draw attention to it.
I just would make this point, and you know, I'm disappointed Maurice has joined in, because generally she's made a mature decision not to in some of this domestic politics. I can recall very positive comments being made by Mr Morrison about China. I can recall very positive comments being made by Tony Abbott about China. Mr Morrison said China provides real stability to the region in 2017. I mean, let's get real here. We understand, both parties of government understand, the difficult challenges of the relationship with China. And I think trying to play politics with it in an election campaign is not of benefit to the country.
Did you want to say something more about that?
I think I responded in my previous answer.
Okay, Anthony Galloway.
Thank you both for the debate today. I just wanted to ask, I think we can all agree that China has not yet offered a major olive branch to Australia. The trade strikes are still in place. There's no dialogue at the ministerial level. If Labor is elected to government and a major overture is made, such as the trade strikes are removed and or Foreign Minister Wong does secure a meeting with her Chinese counterpart, how should a new Labor government respond to that olive branch in the early days of government?
Well, I think Maurice made the point that, you know, the position of the government, notwithstanding some of the politics, has been that people are available to meet. I mean, China isn't going anywhere. And neither is, you know, China changing some of the positions you articulated. You know, we would, I think all Australians would welcome China complying with its international obligations, and both in relation to human rights, in relation to international law, and we will continue to press for the coercive trade measures to be lifted.
Did you have a response?
Well, it's a question to Senator Wong. So
Yes,
Yes,
but sorry.
Yes, you're entitled to a 1 minute comment on her,
You
her
get
answer.
to
Well,
have a go at me
my
now.
observation would be that there is an open invitation, in fact, a sincere willingness to engage. I have corresponded on a number of occasions with State Councillor Wong in relation to COVID-19, in relation to Afghanistan, in relation to the circumstances of detained Australians, particularly the circumstances of their detention and the need for it to be in accord with international law and detention requirements. I continue to do that, and I patiently await a response.
The next question is from Stephen Jedgetts.
Hi, thank you both for your time. We're in Canberra, so forgive me for asking a very Canberra-focused question. Would I be able to ask both of you, perhaps first Senator Wong, are there any key institutional barriers that you've identified in Canberra to the pursuit of effective Australian foreign policy, perhaps including within the Department of Foreign Affairs or between the interaction between the Department of Foreign Affairs and other agencies in Canberra, which you would seek to tackle should you become Foreign Minister? And Senator Payne, can I ask you, obviously...
Did you notice there must be some public servants in the room because there's a ripple. It's all right, I'm not actually going to answer the question.
They may or may not
it's fine.
regard themselves as institutional
If Senator
barriers.
Payne would care to comment, she's welcome to.
Sorry, what was the last bit? If Senator Payne wishes to
yes.
comment. Look, I think that I've been clear that I think we need a greater capability within DFAT. I've been clear about that. I've also been clear, as I averted to my opening, and as you know, occasionally I hope you read my speeches, I've said it previously, we need to get much better at integrating the different aspects of state power. Strategic power matters, but it is enhanced and furthered, as the CDF said, I think it was last week or the week before, by the other elements of state power. So I do want more capability within DFAT, and I do want much better coordination between the different aspects of government in what is an unprecedented time. I mean, I remember in 2017 I wrote an article for Australian Foreign Affairs, and maybe it was 2019, and I made the point that the playbook of past decades wasn't of great utility now. It was probably a bit wordy for a National Press Club discussion, but my point is it isn't business as usual, is it? And we face very different circumstances at any time really since the end of World War II. And that the proposition that the world is changing and our region is being reshaped has to be, our laser-like focus across government. And we have to ensure we have the capacity and leadership to respond and deal with it.
Thanks, Stephen. And I think it is important, in fact it's essential, that there are no, to use your words, institutional barriers, and that we have the strongest engagement between the key national security agencies in particular. And we've worked very hard to ensure that that is the case, that our and you're the one who started bureaucratic language, so I'm going to extend it a little further. But what are known as interdepartmental engagements, committees and such, are very much whole of government to deal with the critical responses to some of the greater challenges that we face. To make sure that when the table is prepared, that DFAT, Defence, Home Affairs, and other key agencies are sitting around it. I would say that I'm pleased to see that the operating budget of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade has increased from around $2 billion between the last financial year to $2.2 billion in the next financial year, in this financial year, and that we will see $3 billion of additional funding to DFAT through to 25-26. We've opened new posts in key locations. These are good indicators for the work that we are doing.
Tom Connell.
Tom.
Thanks very much, Senators. It's a question for you both. I'm not sure how that affects timekeeping.
2 and 2.
Trust me, there's a screen behind us.
Yeah,
It's,
it's 2 and 2.
vigilant.
2 and 2.
Perhaps I'll start with you, Senator Wong. A common refrain from leaders from both parties has been Australia doesn't need to choose between the US and China over the years. Is that still the case?
Well, I think China has changed. I mean, I think that you're referencing probably a way of thinking about it between, that might have described the way in which Mr. Howard was able to manage our principal strategic relationship with the United States and our principal economic relationship with China. But clearly, the way in which economic power is being utilised for strategic purposes means that duality, that as a model of engagement, is no longer the case. I would make this point, though. We have actually already chosen. We have an alliance that's over 70 years old between us and the United States, an alliance with deep bipartisan support, so we have already chosen. But the point that we should be focused on is less about great power competition full stop, but what is the region that we want, with the rules that we want, that enables Australian interests to be advanced and protected. That is the key for us, and that means working with the US, which remains the indispensable partner in the reshaping of the region, but it means working also with other partners, other relationships. It means doing more in Southeast Asia and doing a great deal more in the Pacific.
I think acknowledging and indeed embracing the fundamental of the Australia-US alliance is obviously foundational in our approach in the region and more broadly. But we must be able to continue to pursue key relationships with countries like China, and they are issues that we've discussed already here today. But on the question of strategic choice, I think it's very important to reinforce Australia has no expectations and is not making any indication to any other of our partners or any countries in the region that they would be forced into making choices. Ultimately, they are sovereign decisions for the countries in our region. They have historic and current relationships that are their own. And I do think that sometimes the high volume, lots of light and movement discussions in Australia, not necessarily at the political level, often at the academic and media level about these issues, can feel intimidating to countries in our region. And I think it's very important to emphasise that Australia's expectation is that they will always be sovereign nations who will make their own decision.
Right. Can I just have a follow-up on that? If what you're referencing is the articulation by the Singaporean Prime Minister and others about we don't want to choose between the US and China, I would say this. The basis of our engagement with the Southeast Asian nations is most effective if we find those principles and issues where we share views, rather than getting into an argument about great power competition. I mean, Southeast Asia has a very long history of dealing with great power competition.
The last quote I could find on that was 2019 from Scott Morrison, so I take that it perhaps was a comment.
Yeah, and well, Prime Minister Lee has said it at least at 2 Shangri-La dialogues, I think. He has made that clear. And so my point is that message to us, that is a message to the great powers. I think a message to Australia as an ally of the United States is to recognise that the most powerful basis of our engagement with Southeast Asia is to focus on those issues where we have a shared interest. And we have a shared interest, as I said before, for example, on rules of the road such as the law of the sea. We have the same interest as Indonesia, which was instrumental in developing it, as the Philippines and so forth. So I think the exhortation from Prime Minister Lee it should be heard by Australian leaders.
And one of the reasons that we've consistently said that in our view of the Indo-Pacific, ASEAN is central to that and warmly welcomed ASEAN's outlook on the Indo-Pacific is because our neighbours and our partners in ASEAN bring that diversity of perspectives across a vast range of different cultures and political systems that we work closely with. And it's so important to respect those and to make sure that Australia's engagement is not in any way suggesting that there is a choice to be made by others.
Andrew Tillett.
Andrew Tillett from the Financial Review. Thank you both for appearing, obviously.
And not for shouting at each other.
Yes.
Check my watch.
We agreed we wouldn't shout.
I am from the Nine Empire, so we might see how it goes.
Hence what I said.
An empire now, that's a big claim.
A question for both of you. And given that we are here at the National Press Club, I'd like to ask about Julian Assange. The UK Home Secretary is considering, is weighing up the extradition of Mr Assange to the US. His lawyers got till next week to put submissions in. Can you tell me, whoever is Minister after May 21, will either of you lobby the UK government to not go ahead with the extradition? And if he is extradited to the US, will you lobby the US to drop the charges, or will you let that court process go through? Thanks.
I've consistently said that whilst this matter is still within legal process, and it is still within legal process in the United Kingdom, that I would not make any comments in a way that would prejudice the proceedings for the case. The UK Magistrates Court has now, as you said, referred the matter to the Home Secretary for the decision on extradition, but it is subject to further appeals by Mr Assange if such a decision is made, and I'm not going to make any additional comment.
Well, obviously Mr Assange's case has gone on a long time. His case, as the Minister correctly identifies, is before the Home Secretary, and they will make their decision. I would note the government has offered him, as is correct, as it should, consular assistance. I think whatever the views people have about Mr Assange's behaviour, I think the case, it is clear this has dragged on a long time. And certainly we would encourage, were we elected, the US government to bring this matter to a close, but ultimately that is a matter for the administration.
That is the point that I've made consistently to partners in the United States and the United Kingdom, and I've raised it with respective Secretaries of State in both countries and over multiple administrations.
Could I ask as a follow-up to that, you mentioned that it's still subject to legal processes. When do they end? I mean, if, say, he gets extradited to the US, there'll still technically be legal processes. What is the cut-off for the Australian government, and what would be the view of an Albanese government about when is the appropriate point to intervene?
Well, we can't intervene in the legal processes of other countries, and I say that consistently, Laura, in relation to multiple Australians who are detained in various circumstances around the world. It is not a case of us being able to intervene in legal proceedings. I've raised Mr Assange's position with the US Secretary of State in both the Trump and the Biden administration, with the UK Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs across both secretaries with whom I have, three secretaries with whom I have worked consistently. And consent has been withdrawn by Mr Assange for us to receive any information about him, and notwithstanding 36 separate approaches to Mr Assange by our High Commission in London to offer consular assistance, which includes engaging with appropriate legal support and also assistance with medical support, we've received no response.
Thank you both.
Thanks. At this point, I would like to invite the two of you to ask questions of each other, and maybe Senator Wong, in the spirit of question time in the Senate, you might like to ask a question of Senator Payne first.
My question goes to the inconsistency of the government's response in relation to Solomon Islands and the disclosure of the Security Pact. Minister, you said you first became aware of the treaty when it became public. The Deputy Prime Minister said the government was, quote, all over it, and the Prime Minister said it was no surprise. Your government has also lurched from respecting Solomon's sovereignty and saying that we can't throw our weight around, to making comparisons about Cuba and the Prime Minister issuing threats about red lines. So I'd like to understand why so inconsistent and what is the position?
Well, I don't agree with the premise of all of your question, but
that's what she says in question time too.
But I've only had 6 occasions to be asked a question by Senator Wong on foreign affairs in question time in the last parliamentary term, so I haven't had a chance to say it very often. The question of when we were aware of the particular security agreement, and I have said, and Senator Selger and others have said, is when that security agreement itself was leaked on social media. However, what the senior ministers of the government, including the Prime Minister, have been clear about is that we have worked with my department, with security agencies, in relation to our concerns about China's pursuit of a greater security presence in the region, and particularly in the Solomon Islands, for an extended period of time now. In fact, all of the time that I have been in this role, and particularly since, of course, the change in recognition by the Solomon Islands, diplomatic recognition from Taiwan to China, because that has evoked a much more forward-leaning, assertive effort by China in relation to security engagement in the region. So that is not just confined to the Solomon Islands, it goes to other countries throughout the region as well. It goes to concerns that are raised around the Pacific Island Forum table from time to time in relation to sovereignty and the implications of a non-Pacific partner or member being in a position of, in a security delivering position. In terms of red lines, though, I do think it is important that we are clear and that we receive, in the way in which it has been made, the clear statement of Prime Minister Sogavare that the Solomon Islands will not accept a Chinese military base in the Solomon Islands.
Well, the red line language is the Prime Minister.
As I have said,
that
is something which he makes not just as a commitment to Australia, but he makes it publicly, overtly, as a commitment to the entire Pacific.
Well, my question... I would like to... Was the red line language that Prime Minister Morrison used discussed with you before using it, and what does it mean?
I don't talk about my conversations with the Prime Minister, as you well know, Senator Wong, and it means that there are certain key security issues, such as the presence of a Chinese military base in our region, which would be of deep and fundamental concern to Australia.
Which is why there shouldn't have been one in the first place.
Senator Payne, your question to Senator Wong.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Laura. A couple of days after the election, about 3 days, the new Prime Minister, whoever that will be, will need to demonstrate Australia's ongoing commitment in this region. They will be attending the meeting of the Quad, and I know that the Coalition has demonstrated our absolute commitment to making the Quad a major piece of our regional cooperation as it now is. But what would Labor take to that meeting this time to demonstrate it is committed and that it won't abandon the Quad and our partners like it did in 2008?
Well, we've made clear we are committed to the Quad. I made that clear some years ago publicly. Mr Albanese has made that clear, and we've already engaged, as is appropriate, in the lead up to an election about logistics and arrangements to ensure if elected, we would be in place in Tokyo for the commencement of the Quad. I think one of the things that we, should no doubt be speaking about is the developments that we've just been discussing, which is what is occurring in the Pacific, the fact that Solomon Islands is looking beyond Australia for security arrangements, and that is of relevant to the nations of the Quad and the countries of the Indo-Pacific.
I would say that, of course, the Solomon Islands in November of last year looked to Australia for security response, and Australia, with New Zealand, with Fiji, with Papua New Guinea, with therefore the Pacific family, made that response in a matter of hours and provided that support on the ground in the Solomon Islands. And I also reinforce that Prime Minister Sogavare has indicated that that is his view, that Australia is the first security partner of the Solomon Islands, and I've reiterated that with Foreign Minister Manelli myself.
This is the inconsistency again. I mean, you're saying essentially, if I may, this isn't that big a deal. Barnaby Joy's saying it's like Cuba. So I'm just working out which is the position.
I've never said it's not a big deal, Senator Wong, and that is a misrepresentation of my position.
Okay. The next question's from Pablo Vinales.
Aren't you on the plane? You're not on the plane.
Back briefly. Thank you.
Couldn't afford to use this.
Taiwan's foreign minister has told SBS World News exclusively that Australia should pay more attention in the Pacific. He says Beijing's deal with the Solomon Islands is a security threat. You both concede China has changed. Does Australia need to change, not in its values, but in the way it cooperates with other nations, like Taiwan, for instance?
Well, we have been strong supporters of Taiwan's participation in all fora in which statehood is not a requirement. I would reference the World Health Organization as one in particular, and we've worked with like-mindeds to ensure that, particularly in the context of COVID-19 and the success that Taiwan had in addressing the pandemic, that they were able to participate around those tables and to share that experience and that expertise. Will continue to do that. We have a strong representative office in Taipei, and we will work closely with countries in the Pacific like Nauru, like Tuvalu, who of course continue to recognise Taiwan, as we do. I do think it is important to note that across the Pacific, we are the only country in the world which has a diplomatic mission in every country of the Pacific Island Forum. It's an important diplomatic engagement. It's an important presence. It enables us to work with all partners, whether it is in some countries partners like China, in other countries partners like Taiwan, to bring to the region that joined-up approach.
Well, I think the question demonstrates a few things. First is our region is being reshaped. Secondly, it demonstrates, if you don't do enough in a region, even if you've got the historical ties there or the institutional ties, that vacuum is filled. That vacuum is filled, and the reality in the Pacific is, we have not done enough. We have not done enough, and we have also gone missing on climate, which people, some in the Morrison government like to dismiss. I refer back to the Boe Declaration, where Pacific leaders told us themselves, number one national security issue is climate. On Taiwan, Labor's position, which has been a long-standing bipartisan position of both parties of government, is our focus is ensuring that, or working with others to ensure there is no unilateral change to the status quo. It's a long-standing position. It's a position that Tsai Ing-wen has articulated again. What is it we can do to ensure we deter any unilateral changes to the status quo? And we can do that by ensuring we engage with Taiwan in the fora that we are able, recognising the diplomatic situation. We can do that by ensuring we talk to other parties in the region about the risks to the region from any unilateral change to the status quo.
I'd also say, in addition, that obviously we approach these matters in the context of Australia's clear One China policy. But I do think it is immensely simplistic to suggest that overseas development assistance or the quantum thereof is the fundamental nub of a problem here. Australia is, by the length of the strait, frankly, provider of 2/3 of international assistance to the Solomon Islands across multiple areas of endeavour, from justice to education to gender to health to many others, agriculture included. I see Andrew Campbell here today as well from ACR. It's not about that. It is a very complex question around security, which we've been discussing here today, and it's not as simplistic as also saying it's about climate if you accept the fact, as I think the world does, that China is the world's largest emitter, then forming agreements with the world's largest emitter because you apparently disagree with Australia on climate is not logical, not even inherently logical.
Well, look at the results. Look at the results. I mean, we've announced a comprehensive policy on the Pacific that does recognise, and the one thing I do agree with you on, Minister, is that it's not only quantum. I think more investment is needed, and we've announced that. But we have to leverage our strengths. We have to leverage our strengths, and our strengths include our voice and our proximity. One of the most important parts of the Pacific package we announced were the changes to the Pacific labour schemes and the additional Pacific visa. because they recognise that what are the things we have that other parties who might have a lot more capital ultimately don't have? We have proximity, and we can use that to build stronger relationships.
If I could just elegantly segue, or attempt it, between the topic of Taiwan back to the US and the comments you made earlier. Senator Wong, I think you were channeling Madeleine Albright when you described it as the indispensable partner, and you said the US alliance was absolutely foundational. I'd like to ask you both to comment on whether the US approach to Ukraine has given you greater confidence about the way the US is engaging in the world, less confidence, or does it sort of give you a materially different view about the way the US is pursuing foreign policy? Senator Payne first.
Thank you. And I think the US approach, well, let me affirm what I said in my previous remark about the foundational nature of the alliance and say how much we will welcome warmly the significant appointment of Caroline Kennedy as the next US ambassador to Australia, and we expect to see her here in the next couple of months. In terms of the approach on Ukraine, we have been working very closely with the United States, with NATO more broadly, with the UK and other partners, but particularly many smaller liberal democracies in the region who see the threat that Russia's illegal, unlawful invasion of Ukraine presented to them. But what the US's engagement has done, and I think it is very important, is to bring together a global coalition of great strength to both support Ukraine and to extract a price on Russia for their actions. That includes in relation to providing military support for Ukraine, in relation to a strong sanctions regime in which Australia is an active participant. We have sanctioned over 800 individuals and entities as part of that. It is a real global coalition, and the US is a key leader.
What I'd say is the invasion of and the unlawful war being waged against the people of Ukraine by Mr. Putin it has been horrific and continues to be. But what it has demonstrated is the capacity of the US and its NATO partners to work together. It has demonstrated the capacity of a great many nations around the world to stand against the abrogation of the UN Charter, which we see before us. It has changed policy in Germany in terms of defence budgets and their policy around the provision of weapons, and it has led Finland to say it wants to join NATO. So there is an interesting demonstration here. One of the arguments that Mr. Putin used was the expansion of NATO. Well, now we see this. And obviously, from our perspective, we think that's a matter for them, but it's a good thing.
Daniel Hurst from Guardian Australia. On the climate crisis, we know that the US and Pacific Island nations, amongst others, would like Australia to increase its 2030 target. Last year, Australia did not increase its formal 2030 target. Last month, the US Assistant Secretary of State, Monica Medina, when asked whether Australia should lift its 2030 target this year, said, "We're calling on every country that didn't increase their target to raise it," close quote. To both of you, do you see your 2030 targets that you're putting to voters as fixed or set for the next 3 years, or are you at least open to considering outreach from our forever friends and Pacific Island friends? And Senator Wong, I can't help but get clarity on your Julian Assange answer earlier. Okay. Bring this matter to a close. What do you mean by that?
You start.
No, we put out our policy. We've made clear our 2030 target. And I'd make this point. We haven't just plucked the number out of the air. We've actually gone through the different policy measures. It's the difference between us and some of the parties to our left. We have to work out how we deliver this. Gone through our policy measures and worked out what sort of emissions reduction, what sort of cost impact, cost benefit it will have. So, you know, it is a responsible but ambitious target. I think, in part, and I, as Climate Minister many years ago, I did engage with Pacific Island nations, and we didn't have the same position on targets. You know, I thought ours were very ambitious. They wanted us to go further. But in part, it's also respecting their experience and talking through with them what are the other things that we can do. And to airily suggest, oh, well, they don't care about it that much because they're talking to China, I'll say this. I don't think our reputation has really ever got over Mr Dutton standing next to Mr Morrison and making a joke about water lapping out your door. It's utterly disrespectful of people's experience.
You going to answer his other question?
What was the other?
No,
No, I thought she
ruled
said
out
no.
of order.
Oh, Daniel, you're in trouble. Australia has been very clear about our emissions, which are currently, we've seen 20.8% below 2005 levels, and we are actually dealing in outcomes, not ambitions, outcomes which exceed the outcomes of the United States, of Canada, of New Zealand, just for example, and of course exceed the OECD average in the rate at which our emissions have fallen. They're the lowest on a per capita basis in 3 decades in Australia. So we are delivering on that. And we took to COP26, as you know, a net zero commitment 2050, which was overwhelmingly welcomed by our partners in the region. I'm not suggesting that they don't seek more. I've reread the Kanaki II declaration on these matters and others in recent times. I understand that. But our support is practical and it is helpful. We've taken, for example, delegations from 9 of our Pacific Island partners to COP26 to enable them to attend and to participate and to lead, which they do in all of those international fora. Same with the Our Ocean Conference in Palau just in April of this year. We've doubled our climate finance commitment to $2 billion, $700 million of that, which will be directed specifically to the Pacific at least. And we have been delivering practical solutions. It doesn't matter whether it's the solar farm that I announced in Palau in December last year that will enable Palau to deliver 20% of its energy in renewables, or whether it is the Tina River hydropower project in the Solomon Islands or the off-grid solar across Papua New Guinea through the Powering Communities program. These are practical and deliverable outcomes for those countries in a way in which meets their needs, both their infrastructure and their climate needs, same as the Australia Infrastructure Financing Facility for the Pacific. Its outcome. No, I'm not saying that at all. I didn't say that, Daniel. I said there was more.
But the target is fixed.
Good afternoon.
Oh, the target, yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
Good afternoon, Melissa Code from the Mandarin. We've had a bit of discourse during today's debate about the importance of our Pacific family and also climate change. Marise Payne mentioned the 3 Rs, resilience, relationship, rules. To that end, my question to both of you is, if you will win government after the election, will you, in partnership with the Pacific, host a UN climate meeting or create a new ambassador for climate?
We've already said we'd reinstate the Ambassador for Climate Change. Unlike that, I don't necessarily include Maurice in this, but some in her party appeared to be allergic to that term, so we would reinstate it. We've also said we would look at bidding for a hosting of the Conference of the Parties within the UNFCCC with our Pacific partners. Our engagement with our Pacific partners, our Pacific neighbours on climate matters greatly.
We do have a very effective ambassador for the environment who covers climate change as well in that remit and has strongly represented Australia, particularly at the last COP in Glasgow, and works closely with the Pacific, was part of the Our Ocean Conference in Palau in April as well with Secretary Kerry and others. In relation to whether or not we would host a COP, we would speak with our Pacific neighbours, of course, as to their ambitions and their interests and determine whether that was something they wish to pursue.
The next question is from Dominic Giannini.
Dominic Giannini, Australian Associated Press. Thank you both for appearing here today. On the Solomon Islands relationship, there has been some sort of breakdown that has led to this security treaty. So to both of you, how do we fix this? And so to the government side, how has this been allowed to happen given that you tout our aid levels and our climate commitments? And to the opposition side, apart from sending a foreign minister over, what specifically will you do given that our aid commitments at the moment aren't or can't seem to match China's? And with the elephant in the room being corruption, will the parties take the same stance as China's cyber attacks by calling it out as a deterrence if corruption were to be discovered in the Solomon Islands?
Well, I'm happy to go first if you'd like. Yeah, we did put out quite a detailed response or detailed policy on the Pacific, precisely because we thought it was important in this debate, given the salience to our national interest, for people to see what the alternative government wanted to do in relation to the Pacific, to ensure we are the partner of choice in the Pacific, to ensure that the Pacific family is more than just words. Now, what we've said is this package is about leveraging our strengths. I can take you through all the details, but there are a few highlights which I think matter in addition to the additional ODA. One is doubling the Pacific Maritime air surveillance program. The EEZ of Pacific nations is, I think, almost 3 times the size of Australia, possibly more. So this is, and this is a key interest for them. This is about illegal fishing. It is about protecting their fisheries, which is a source of resources as well as a source of protein. We want to deliver an Indo-Pacific broadcasting strategy because I think you need voices in the region. And I think it was short-sighted for the government's cuts to the ABC, which had the effect of ending a whole range of services into the Pacific. And then, of course, the labour schemes. So improving the labour mobility schemes, enabling people for the longer-term scheme to bring their families, and the visa category that I described. That is about leveraging our proximity and access to our labour market, because the people-to-people ties are a key way in which we ensure we are genuinely part of the Pacific family.
Dominic, I don't agree with all of the premise of your question, because I think it is oversimplifying what is a very complex set of circumstances, not just in a bilateral sense, but more broadly. And to the question of relationships on a basis of foreign minister to foreign minister, my relationship with, for example, Foreign Minister Manelli, who has just briefed informally members of the Pacific Island Forum from Suva on these matters, I think on Wednesday of this week, is a very strong one. But we must continue to make the contribution that we do to the security and the stability of our region that maintains the resilience of economies. That is why we are making a contribution of over $20 million in terms of budget support to the Solomon Islands. It's why we've delivered over 500,000 vaccines to the Solomon Islands of 1 million, and will continue to do so, including the health security that comes with that, the end-to-end support. It is essential that we continue to grow that, and that is literally what the Pacific Step Up has been doing. But countries ultimately, and it would be very disturbing if we were not prepared to acknowledge this in Australia. Countries will ultimately make sovereign decisions for their own reasons that occasionally we don't and can't change and can't influence. And that is what respect is about, frankly, with partners as well. Can I say in relation to Labor's plan, I see a lot of it drawn from existing programs, a whole-of-government approach like the Office of the Pacific Step Up. We already train defence and security personnel from the Pacific. We strongly fund the Pacific Maritime Security Program, and it would be refunded when it is due to be refunded in a
proposing
budget,
to double it, actually,
which would represent a similar commitment to the opposition.
That's not right.
But labour mobility is a really interesting question here, because it is about people-to-people links in many ways. And what Labor's announcement does is completely muddy the waters on labour mobility. There was no consultation from Labor with the NFF and the Fresh Produce Alliance. They've both said that publicly. It's confusing for them and it's confusing for sending countries. And what happens to the countries that have already, like Vietnam, agreed to participate in the ag visa, which they appear to have scrapped, which Indonesia and Thailand and other countries are engaged on? I don't know.
Senator Payne went over time.
Well, first, we don't, tear up agreements. So obviously that's not been announced, the MOU with Vietnam, but if you've actually managed to get an MOU for an ag visa that not one visa has been issued for, you know, an incoming government would respect it. But I remember going to the Pacific with Julie Bishop, and I remember the clear message that she understood and that was given to us, that the Pacific labour schemes were one of our key ways to engage. It was one of our key diplomatic strengths, central to our relationships. And she stood up against Barnaby Joyce and the National Party, against the sort of opening of an agricultural visa beyond the Pacific, because she understood how important this was diplomatically, as well as the importance of ensuring we have agricultural labour. So it is disappointing to me that you would go down that route when you understand as Foreign Minister this is one of our key strengths. It has been a key strength that was understood by Ms Bishop and past governments, and it will be a key strength if we are elected on the 21st of May.
And we will absolutely maintain that key strength, but we also have a commitment to growing Australia's agricultural sector to $100 billion by 2030,
not
which
one
doesn't appear
visa,
to be supported.
Not one visa in your ag visa. And you're having an argument on social media with David Littleproud telling everybody the policy is going to lead to permanency, which isn't the case in terms of answers and estimates. I mean, it is another inconsistency.
Senators, we're now getting short of time, so I'm going to cut you both off there. We'll have a very short question from Nick Stewart and a 1 minute answer from each of you.
1 minute.
Maurice, final question. 30 years ago, you were a young radical. You weren't part of the right-wing dominance of the Liberal Party. You've fought your way through. You've actually become a senator, one of the long-serving ministers. You're also Minister for Women. Why are women now deserting the Liberal Party? What can the Liberal Party do to win them back?
Well, I disagree. I was a radical. I may have been a progressive, but I'll not necessarily claim radical. And Nick, I've been very strongly committed to ensuring that we have been able to deliver our two last women's budget statements, which together on women's leadership, women's economic security, women's safety, deliver over $5 billion of support. And it is not just about that. It's overwhelmingly about the practical application of those, working with the states and territories on the next national plan, ensuring that we're addressing economic security through our changes to childcare in 2018 and again this year, our work on paid parental leave, and importantly on leadership and particularly participation.
Well, it's a good thing that Maurice is Minister for Women, because I can remember when Tony Abbott was under the coalition. So that's an advance. I just want to make this point. I have, including when I was much younger, thank you for reminding us both of that, advocated very strongly inside my party for affirmative action targets. And I didn't just do that, we didn't just do that, the women with whom I worked, because we wanted to get more women into Parliament for its own sake. We wanted to do it because we wanted to change the focus of political parties. And I can tell you, having been part of a government and now part of a shadow cabinet, it does matter having women in the room. And it matters in terms of the sorts of policies you announce. The most obvious example, but not the only one, is the fact that our very first budget reply, Anthony Albanese, in his very first budget reply, Anthony Albanese announced our childcare policy.
I'm very proud to be part of a cabinet that has more women than any other Australian cabinet, with 8 sitting around the table.
Thank you, Minister. I'd like to ask both of you now to make your closing statements of 1 minute each, starting with you, Senator Payne. Sorry, 2 minutes. Sorry. They changed rules on me.
Thank you very much, and can I thank the participating media for their questions today, and ladies and gentlemen for your presence. I think we have agreed today that we are living in a time of great change and uncertainty. And having served this country as both Defence Minister and Foreign Minister, I've had the privilege of seeing firsthand that Australia is deeply respected and that our voice matters. There will be many tough foreign policy decisions ahead. The Morrison government has shown that we can make those tough decisions and keep Australians safe, whether it is on AUKUS or resisting economic coercion or providing the significant support that was necessary for our region to recover together from the COVID pandemic. We have a clear plan focused on promoting the security and the prosperity of the Australian people. We approach this era of strategic competition with confidence in our plan, confidence in our record on foreign policy, and confidence in Australia. It is not easy, and it won't be easy, but we can thrive in this area. Our strong economy, our record in managing the pandemic mean we are well positioned. There are challenges, but also opportunities for Australia, for our manufacturers, for our exporters, for our innovators, for our students globally and in our region. Under a re-elected Morrison government, Australia will continue to lead, to speak out and to be bold in our purpose. We'll be there with other freedom-loving nations when it comes to supporting countries like Ukraine as they defend their freedom, their democracy and sovereignty. We are always mindful that foreign policy is not detached from the lives of Australians. It is there to further the interests of our nation and improve the well-being, the livelihoods, the security, the prosperity of each and every person in this country.
Senator Wong.
Our nation has not known such a vexing set of circumstances since the end of World War II. But I say to you this, the risks we face will simply be compounded by 3 more years of Mr Morrison. More of the same excuses, the same political games over national interest, the same buck passing, whilst our problems only get bigger. Anthony Albanese and Labor have a plan, a responsible plan for a better future, a Pacific policy to ensure we secure our region, stepping up in Southeast Asia to rebuild trust and meet challenges together, shared challenges together, including additional ODA and a special envoy for the region, and shaping the world for the better by taking action on climate, at home and abroad, and modern slavery. What I would say to Australians is this. This will be a very loud, possibly quite angry last week of the election campaign. But when it comes to foreign policy, this is our commitment. If you elect Labor on the 21st of May, you will have a leader in Anthony Albanese who will always put Australia's national interests first. You will have a foreign minister with clout. You will have a cabinet that works together to maximise Australia's influence in the world and to secure our region. You will see more leadership, more energy and more resources. We will take responsibility and we will act. We won't pass the buck. Thank you for your time today.
Senators Payne and Wong, thank you.